Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of E&Ftv. Today, we have a very special episode indeed, as Edwards and Finn have managed somehow to get the senior commercial team, or the leaders of those senior commercial teams anyway, on a panel discussion. So I'm going to be welcoming the leaders at Set Hotels. I'm unbelievably excited about this, and ever since posting a couple of weeks ago about getting questions in, it's been incredible the amount of questions we've had come in, but also the different types of questions and the different people that have actually been sending them in. So we've had people from universities who are still studying, new grads, experienced professionals, and actually at the more senior level as well. So it's been fantastic to get these guys on the show. So I'll take no more time and ask them to actually introduce themselves. So let's start with Brian.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be on the panel and on the show. So looking forward to it. My name is Brian Gore. I am the VP of Branding, Marketing, and Digital at the Set Hotels, and have been with the company for getting on about 6 years now. But very briefly, my background has been across various luxury brands within the hospitality world. So the likes of Mandarin Oriental, Langham Hotels, Bulgari, Ritz-Carlton, and so on. Very excited about the future of the Set Hotel. So we're at an interesting time, which I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about as we go through.
Fantastic. And Ruud?
So good morning, everyone. Thanks again for inviting us on this panel. Very excited to be here indeed. My name is Ruud Hoyer. I'm overseeing global sales for the Set, as well as involved with B2B marketing. And I've been with the company now for 2 years in this particular role. But the first time I joined the Set Hotels was actually about 8 years ago. So time flies by.
Certainly does. It certainly does. And last but certainly not least, Robin.
I was expecting more saving the best till last there, but I'm Robin, and I look after the revenue, reservations, and distribution functions for the Set Hotels. Been with the company about 6 years as well, similar to Brian, and before that spent 5 years with Jumeirah, and before that also companies like Intercontinental, IHG, Quintessential, which then became Q Hotels, and Le Méridien.
Right, fantastic. Just for any audience members that haven't seen one of these panels before, it's basically a project that we've put together, which is the Ambassador Project. Now, the Ambassador Project we created to get leaders together to come up with new ideas and be able to sit on platforms like this for people to actually have their questions heard and answered. One thing that I do find sometimes with events, if they are live, is that questions will be coming through in streams and they don't actually got to really. There's the questions that the host usually asks, and then the questions at the end are sort of more of an afterthought. Whereas every single one of these, bar 3, have been from you guys. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everybody that sent something in. And I hope that obviously we can get through everything today. So without further ado, I think we should go through to the first question if you guys are all up for it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Fantastic. Okay, so the first one is for, let's say, Ruud. So how is the relationship between sales, so quantity, and revenue management optimization? How is the relationship between those?
So generally speaking, I would say very healthy. And when I say very healthy, that also sometimes means a bit of healthy competition, because I would say each of these functions do very much represent their own area and their own interest, but also their own area of expertise. So in my experience, at least, I think the relationship generally is very good. I think it's important, I think from a sales perspective, certainly when it comes down to revenue management, to ensure that the revenue management actually receives the full picture of a certain inquiry, for example, if availability needs to be checked. So I do feel, and that's something that revenue managers sometimes get a little bit frustrated by, is that they don't get that. So I do think it's a responsibility from sales to qualify a piece of business and to provide a full business case to revenue. Also, not just looking at this particular piece of business, but also sharing what the future potential of that particular piece of business is, so that they can make a well-informed decision.
I think it'd be right as well if we get Robin's view on this. So go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, no, I think sales and revenue today are closer than they've ever been in terms of the way they work together. Right down to, as Ruud said, I think communication is the most vital thing between the two. There's, of course, the kind of day-to-day things like discussing particular inquiries and what you can do to convert it and so on. But, the best information that revenue can get to make strategic decisions for the future is generally from sales, because everyone's talking to both the kind of direct consumers, but also your partners, the travel agents. They're the ones that are actually traveling and going to your key feeder markets and getting the real feel for what's happening and what the opportunities are. So I think if your sales and revenue functions aren't, very closely kind of fused together in that sense, there's something that needs to be looked at in your organization. And of course, there's still, a lot of healthy debate, a lot of healthy discussion. Sales, of course, want to convert, and so they should. And revenue are sometimes, trying to apply the brakes on a certain booking. Someone else might come along, and it's always that healthy balance. And it's often that neither is wrong. But the healthy balance is what, brings the best outcome for the business at the end of the day.
Sure. And I suppose almost the impartial party on this. I mean, Brian, from obviously what the guys have said towards this question, I mean, what are your thoughts on it from your experience and your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's changed over the years, actually. I mean, when I first started in the industry, for sure, there's more of a disconnect between sales and revenue.
Yeah.
And I think the revenue function has come a long way in this, the last 10, sort of 15 years, where actually there is that communication in place, and it has to be there. You're right. I think even marketing gets involved in a certain aspect. If that piece of business has a marketing element to it, for example, maybe there's a piece of business that's actually filming inquiry, but the actual coverage that you can get out of that adds value to that booking as well. Yeah. So I think communication is key. I think both Ruud and Robin said it. It's about talking and understanding what's important to the business overall and taking that holistic view, because everyone can be right. Actually, there isn't a wrong answer. So no, it is just about talking together.
I was going to say, I suppose because there is no formal right answer, that's why there is this constant debate or constant pushback on certain departments and sort of viewpoints, I suppose. And again, it's one of these things where, I mean, we've talked about this on the show quite a lot, and it's this breaking down of the silos, all these sort of buzzwords that we all like to talk about. But the fact of the matter is, it comes down to communication. That's it. And if you communicate things effectively, surely all teams should be on the same page, because we're all trying to achieve the same goal, right? To gain revenue for the business and make it a successful business in its own right. So, as you say, there's no right answer, but there's certainly different viewpoints. And I suppose that's also dependent on the environment itself, within different properties, right?
I think each business is different. If there's transparency and everyone understands what the business goals are, what is it right now? Is it about driving rate, or is it about occupancy? And that's often, the question that you're asking yourselves. Changes by time of year, changes by market conditions. Things are very different, of course, now during the pandemic as it was before it was in 2019. So it's always taking that overall view.
Yeah, and I think it's good. Obviously, everyone in your organisation knows the goal of a business, but sometimes they're looking at it from different angles. And I think that's often the case with sales and revenue. And it's good that both are there to remind each other. So, for example, often revenue may not want a booking or may want to negotiate hard on a booking because it doesn't quite work on that particular day or that particular rate. Whereas sales quite often then need to remind revenue that actually there's a longer term picture here. This is a relationship that we're building. Let's take the hit on this one because it's going to pay back 10 times more in the future, So whilst, both functions are, of course, going after the same goal at the end of the day, it's really, I think, quite healthy for them to be, involved in that way.
Yeah. That's actually such a good point, because the sales element is, people sort of forget that sales element is a relationship management element as well, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, Ruud, I suppose from your perspective, that relationship management and that cultivating of that relationship and getting it to where it needs to be to really then drive revenue long term, I suppose that's a huge part of sales.
Absolutely, and I do feel that sometimes where you get a little bit of a kind of hiccup is generally because of the lack by sales to actually inform revenue accordingly of that greater potential. It's either because they haven't actually qualified the business properly, or they just haven't thought about informing revenue accordingly.
Yeah, no, exactly that.
Yeah. And I think also mutual respect actually is also important. Mutual respect for each other as colleagues, but also for each other's area of expertise.
Yeah, it's that trust element as well, isn't it? Trusting what your colleague or your counterpart in that function is able to do and capable of, and being able to trust obviously what they're going to follow through with.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose coming on to the next question then. So this is actually a question for Brian. So Brian, how has the marketing function in your company evolved since the pandemic, and how are you linked? How is this linked with the revenue function?
Guys, it's a good question because it's ultimately changed a lot. I think the pandemic has really allowed everyone to take a little step back and look at what it is you do. And I think being able to adapt has been key. So the sad reality is that we had to stop a lot of the activity that we were doing, which was a financial decision straight away. I think when we entered March last year, we didn't feel that by the end of the month we were going to have our hotels closed. At that point in time, we were not knowing what it was going to be or what the future was going to hold, but we did. So revenue stops. So of course your budget and your expenditure has to slow down or stop to a degree. But really just changing. I think being able to adapt, being flexible, looking at what opportunities there are out there, because there always are opportunities in one way or another. And we had to just look at what we were doing and quickly change our sort of marketing setup more towards the domestic markets for sure.
Yeah.
That was one of the things when we did reopen in September, around that period, it was all about the domestic market. So we had to really adapt and change. So that expenditure that we had on digital marketing activities, for example, trying to gather in the international guests, had to refocus on just the domestic guest. But it also meant repositioning the hotels a little bit. One of the things we did was really introduce a number of things that would appeal more to the domestic market. So maybe that family market or the couples traveling just for a quick city break. And we did that, and then we have to market them. So social media became incredibly important because communication was key. How can we quickly get those messages out into the marketplace as effective and as quickly as possible? So really just adapting. We introduced, of course, home delivery for certain F&B elements. The F&B restaurants and bars and things were closed. But we have a great following in that respect. So we've been really successful with actually launching some cook at home deliveries, or even some deliveries from our, particularly London, our Cakes and Bubbles restaurant has been really popular with delivering some of those sweet treats and so on. So just moving and changing, adapting quickly.
I think it's fair to say on that, whilst of course it's been a horrible situation and a really, difficult time for the industry, there will be some good to come out of it as well. It's almost forced companies to just stand back and take stock of the situation. And I think a lot of companies will come out of it, a lot more flexible, a lot more agile. I think sometimes we're in an industry where you do kind of get stuck a bit and you just kind of reinvent the wheel, and, everyone kind of follows each other in terms of their activities. And I do think it's going to disrupt the industry in a good way as well in a lot of aspects.
Yeah, it's really been interesting. I agree with that. And I think we've been able to reset and look at what our expenditure budgets were. A lot of the times you were doing things because you've just done them before. Let's put that in again this year because we did it last year. It felt good. We had a good return. But certainly one of the things we've been doing, the three of us, and the set has this kind of motto of forward thinking and being innovative and trying to be ahead of the game wherever we can be. And we've been really looking at things that we can do that haven't just been repeating the wheel. So some new things to introduce. Don't spend the money there because we've done it in the past. And actually, when we come out of this, I don't think we're going to see the same sort of setup for our expenditure budgets at all. I think it's going to be completely different.
Yeah. I think also we learned new skills. So I think we had to kind of let go of our job descriptions a little bit. And I think that's something, I think generally speaking, I think if you look at the nature of our company, we tend to, have quite a entrepreneurial DNA, I would say. That's also partly because we're family owned. But I do think that's been one of the greatest gifts, I think, for us all collectively, is that we were able to actually get exposed to, new projects to get involved in. We've, as teams as well, grew closer together, because between the teams in London and Paris and Amsterdam, we've been able to really kind of spend some quality online time together that perhaps before we didn't. And that really benefited, the kind of quality of conversations when it comes to strategy, for example, and new packages and new initiatives that we rolled out as a company across the 3 cities. I would say 4 cities, also including our colleagues in Israel, of course.
Yeah. I think it's one of these things. There's a couple of points. First off, I was so tempted to get the cheesecake, because when I went to Cakes and Bubbles, it changed my life. So I did see that you were doing deliveries, and honestly, that was the first thing I clicked on. So that's one thing that I probably will be posting at some point when I do order it does arrive.
You'll be glad to know we're just launching nationwide delivery as well for the cheesecake.
Amazing. Well, there you go. There's for everybody who's watching, nationwide delivery from Cakes and Bubbles. Is nationwide delivery on the restaurant as well, or just Cakes and Bubbles?
I think it will really eventually, hopefully, be on both. We had the issue with the cheesecake that it has to be kept at a certain temperature, so the transportation was a problem. But Robin's been very happy because he lives further up north, and he can now order his cheesecake from the hotel to be delivered to his home. So
they've basically rolled this out purely for me.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I remember Robin, a couple of years ago now, when obviously we used to meet up for lunches, and he said, honestly, if you can get into Cakes and Bubbles, it's pretty special. And ever since, I've been obsessed with that cheesecake. It just messes with your head. But anyway, coming on to the points that we discussed, I think the first one being the thing that I really loved, actually, that Ruud said, was the relationship and the time spent with each other now is a lot more robust, I suppose. You're spending a lot more time talking to each other, finding different ways of working with each other, and obviously just listening. I think, again, day-to-day life would always dictate that you're always busy, too busy for this, too busy for that. Yes, I can jump on a call, but I've got to jump off in 5 minutes or whatever it might be. And I think putting these 1 hour or half an hour calls in where you are face-to-face, it's via, a screen. But I think it's definitely brought people closer together and functions closer together. I don't know if you guys have experienced this during the pandemic, but I've spoken to a lot of people that have actually built up really good relationships or better relationships with their colleagues than they probably would have done if they weren't on these.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting how we remarked the other day that we spend more time talking to Ruud than we ever have done, with Robin and I being based in London. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but and it is. It's great because actually we communicate so more frequently now.
Yeah.
It's
definitely a help, and changed the way that we work day to day.
No, definitely.
There's also amazing opportunities that come out of that, because you do brainstorm, and I think we obviously come from different areas of expertise. We look at the business with a different from a different angle, I would say, and that really helps. And I feel if the 3 of us actually get together and we brainstorm, we talk about the business and where we want to go as a company, it's tend to be incredibly interesting and productive conversations. And we do put things in action as well straight away, and that's also exciting. So you're not just talking about things, but I think just because we've got quite a flat organizational structure and we're a family-owned company, we are empowered to also move things forward.
Yes. I think it's one of these things as well, as you actually mentioned a moment ago as well, is the entrepreneurial factor, that autonomy and accountability to be able to make those decisions. I think it's so empowering for staff, so people within your teams, to have that opportunity to be entrepreneurial, to be able to move quickly, make decisions, get involved with things. Because I think there is a risk sometimes that especially in our industry, we take that away from a lot of teams these days. And I think this disruption, which I think was such a great way of putting it, has created a lot of negative impacts, don't get me wrong, but I think with any disruption, it always brings potential for positive change. And I think it's down to the management and down to the leadership to be able to identify that and drive it forward. And I think this sort of breakaway from the roles themselves, and as you said, widening that view, finding different ways of being able to work with it. So rather than just being, let's say, a revenue manager, we're now stepping towards a more wider commercial manager or sales or whatever you want to sort of, whichever term you want to go down. It's opening that gate to be able to say, well, what else can I do? How else can I get involved? What are the new projects? I think that's been a massive opportunity for so many businesses more recently.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, I think from like I said, we're a family-owned company, and sometimes when I speak to, colleagues in the industry, they say, oh, the ownership is quite difficult. They have high expectations, right, within the set. It's not an easy employer to work for. And I always say, of course, needs to be a fit, but I do enjoy that entrepreneurial approach. And what I really believe in is transparency and accountability, and to at all times be transparent about what you set out to do, and based on that you deliver. And I personally find it an incredibly empowering management style, because it kind of keeps you sharp as well, right? And always keeps you wanting to deliver the best that you can actually can. And looking at our length of service, each of us within this particular company actually kind of reflects that, I would say.
Yeah, I think we're so lucky to have the structure and the autonomy that we do have. We've all worked for large chains or large companies where that just simply doesn't exist. For almost anything, you have to go through several layers of approval, and it can just make you so slow and lethargic in terms of keeping up with, particularly today, a very fast changing market. But that's absolutely something that is totally against our DNA within the set. And, for example, it allows us to also, we go back to earlier talking about how our industry will often kind of reinvent the wheel. We actually spend quite a lot of our time looking outside of our industry. What are the other industries doing? The automotive industry, the fashion industry, luxury goods, that kind of thing. And because there's so many good ideas out there that we could adopt for our industry, and it really gives us the opportunity to explore that.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where, as you said as well, our industry can be very sluggish when it comes to change. And I think that the businesses that are willing and almost very much proactively on that note are going to do far better in a post-pandemic market, because we're already trying to figure out what it is going to be like, or figuring out exactly where we need to place ourselves. Whereas the businesses out there at the moment that are maybe sitting on it, or there was an analogy I gave last year with sort of reopenings and things, was the sort of Christmas light scenario where hotels will be looking out their windows, effectively seeing what their competition are doing, and then they'll react and then they'll try and do their thing. Whereas I think if you just go on that innovation track, you'll be the ones that are in the lead. And as you say, looking at these other industries that are a lot more adaptable to change could be the way to go. It sort of makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think so. And also, to add to that, I think the pandemic, and I love that saying that necessity is the mother of invention. I think that we've had to really look at what changed this year and last year. And, technology is a great enabler as well. And I think technology is coming so far, particularly in the hospitality industry. The things that we're doing now as a company, that we're doing most recently, we wouldn't have been able to do 10 years ago, because it was either cost prohibitive, or tech companies wouldn't talk to a group as small as us, for example. But we can achieve so much by ourselves now. So it's a real enabler in that way as well. Definitely.
Absolutely. I think with regards to the tech element, there's a space right now where, there's actually a question in here, I believe, with regards to tech. And it was something along the lines of, well, let me try and find it, because I'll see if I can find it. Here we go. So what do you believe organizations should be focusing on in terms of technology and distribution during these difficult times? Legacy systems, or is it time to look at a new option? So these new kids on the block, these sort of, again, more agile and more innovative systems, is it time for them? What are your guys' thoughts on that one? That's a great question from one of our audience.
Yeah, I agree. It is time to look at new options. I say it because it's something that we're actively doing ourselves as a company right now. We're kind of we're morphing a little bit from the set hotels into a kind of a new company that's going to offer some of these services, which as a company our size, actually people wouldn't have thought about doing before.
Right.
But actually, we're going to be a great alternative to some of these traditional companies. And I think that we should always be in that element of forward thinking and being innovative. I think always look at new systems, new options, because there are so many great players in the industry. You know, Robin and I have attended a few events in the past, particularly one in the US, and it's called Focusrite, and they had a huge section on about innovators in tech within the hospitality industry. And some of the things that people are doing is incredibly clever. And they are coming from outside the travel industry to bring this technology in. And I think, you know, we need to be looking at those things, particularly from us. We want to be ahead of the curve and thinking forwardly. So, yeah, really important.
Yeah, it's I totally agree. I mean, you know, with legacy systems, it's not that every legacy system is bad. I think right now, more than ever, you're going to learn, you know, who are the ones that are going to keep up and who haven't, because I'm very confident there's going to be some legacy systems out there that, despite everything that's happened in the past year, will not change in a bad way. Whereas there's some others that might take this as a kick they need to really look again at their, you know, offering. But there are so many innovators and disruptors out there now who are looking at things in a different way. And of course, for some hotels, sticking with legacy systems works perfectly well for them. But for the ones that really want to, you know, be at the front of the pack, you've got to start taking notice of these kind of either new startups or disruptors in the industry. At the same time, it's an absolute minefield. I mean, I must get five messages a day on LinkedIn about some new product that, you know, is going to change our world. And, you know, so it is difficult to really kind of cut through and kind of work out what's right for your business at that particular time, and also kind of 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. Yeah. And
Ruud, I mean, what are your thoughts on the tech side of things? Because I literally have a lot to add to Brian or Robin here.
Yeah, exactly. No, I fully agree with both Brian and Robin. I think it's a very interesting time. Also, now we have the time to actually, you know, take a look at your, your commercial infrastructure and just really kind of take a review of all the systems that you work with and just, you know, decide whether or not that are the best ones to work with, or whether there are other options to and opportunities to make it better. So I do think it's been an exciting time for us to kind of, you know, look out there and educate ourselves and get involved in various conversations with, like you said, various startups as well as legacy system providers, and that's exactly what we've done. And I think companies that haven't done that during the past year have kind of missed a little beat, I think.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And I think, again, it's one of these things where it's given everybody, I think, a push. It's either, as Robin said, it's become a necessity. It's one of these things where if you don't, your competition will. And if your competition does, you're then behind. It's as simple as that. Mm-hmm. It's also, I was speaking to another commercial leader who owns and manages a consultancy business. And she was talking all about tech debt. And if your systems, you know, even if you don't have the latest, you know, new kid off the block system, but it's just a case of keeping your system up to date, keeping your system current and you know, at market standard, I suppose, to be able to keep your business going, but also get it to thrive. There was another conversation I had about the data element. Is if your data is not up to date, accurate, and with all the information about your guest, how are you ever going to understand who your guest is and how to retain that business? And it's one of these things where tech, and obviously combined with data, is just, it's king right now, right? It's everything.
It is. Data is king. I mean, we have, you know, a number of years ago, we implemented a CRM system to enable us to do that ultimately. You know, the more we know our guests, the better we can service them and give them what they want and anticipate what they want or what they need. So just actually gathering that data is a challenge in itself, because I think the hospitality world is notoriously bad for systems integrating with each other. You know, we have our PMS, our CRS, our CRM, you know, all of our systems, you know, our F&B system, our spa system, there's nothing really talks to each other that it should. So just getting that data into one place and having that single moment of truth about each guest is really important. You know, we're still working on that. You know, I think it's a never-ending journey, to be honest.
Let me just note that down so I can create some sort of system that will combine them all, and then I'll be the next Elon Musk or something.
But I think to add to that point, Tom, you made a good point there, which is it's not that you have to change every system. Like there's been a few occasions where we thought, right, this just isn't good enough. We need to find a new solution. But actually, we then go back and speak to our existing the team behind our existing system and find that there's a different way to do it, or there's some functionality we were not aware of. And, especially right now, hotels don't have the resources to be plowing endless amounts of money into technology, which you can do very, very quickly and easily. Yeah. So I think, there's a real opportunity for people to just go back and review their current infrastructure and ask themselves, is this the right way to do it? And speak to their partners and just double check that there isn't some new, upgrade available or new particular way of managing it. And we've kind of been through that ourselves quite a lot. So yeah, I think that was a good point.
Yeah. I think, go on. Sorry, Ruud, go on.
Yeah, maybe just to add to this, actually, I think it also links in nicely, I think, with the fact that we get together here as commercial functions. And to add to this, I think during the first lockdown, our sales team actually really kind of made a point to fully update our entire B2B database. Right. So about 40,000 records or so in total that I literally ran through every single one. And, during the second lockdown, so the end of the year, Q4, we actually kind of set up our own internet booking engine and our own GDS code, the project that's Brian and Robin led, and got our entire sales marketing team together to actually support them with that. And various team members actually comment on the fact that they just love the opportunity to kind of learn new skills, get exposed to something that they would otherwise never get exposed to, and really kind of, took advantage of that. And I think they will benefit from that in their future careers. Yeah,
no, definitely. And I think it's one of these things as well where I was actually having a chat with somebody else, in fact, just the other day. If your database and if your systems are all where they need to be, right? And you understand your customer, you understand them in and out, what they love, what they don't love, what they like when they arrive, all the little things, right? That way you can start working on that retained basis where you can actually start stepping away from the OTA, because the OTA is, of course, there to introduce that new business. But surely it's the sales and relationship team and, of course, the marketing side of things to then start pushing that return. Why don't you come back? Why don't we do this? We know you love this. We know you love that. Or we know when you like to book. And then you start using that data effectively if, obviously, it's in the right place and if it's accurate. So if anything, you're actually driving your repeat business through just the data that you've already got, right?
Yeah, it's been a key focus of ours for a while now, is that battle with the OTAs. You got to love them, but you got to hate them. I mean, there's a place for them for sure. But yeah, ultimately we want as much business as we can get direct. And that business is out there, but you do need to, as you say, maybe use the OTAs to bring you new business. Yeah. And work on your relationship building with your guests that you have once they're in-house. And just building that so that they do ultimately kind of fall in love with your brand and then seek you out to come back again another time.
I think over the years hotels have worked out, like, I think back to 5 years ago, there was a real kind of hostility out there to OTAs. Whereas now I think hotels have worked out how to work with them. Like exactly as you said, Tom, use an OTA to get the guest to you for the first time. That billboard effect to reach markets you just don't have the resources to reach, particularly as independent hotels. But if that guest continues to book, on the OTA the second time, the third time, the fourth time I stay with you, you're doing something very, very wrong. And that's very much the way we look at it. We're not really focusing on whether we can get that guest the first time. Of course, we do our own efforts and that's great. But, the real kind of measure of success in that particular area for us is whether we're getting them to book direct for second, third and fourth time.
Yeah, but I think I agree with a lot of that. But I also think there's a place for an OTA guest that will always be an OTA guest, just simply because who they are. They're looking for the deal all the time, and that's fine. Fine. We'll tap into that when we need it. But by and large, of course, we want to convert them to be direct bookers the next time they stay with us.
Of course. I suppose actually that brings us on to another fantastic question here. Now, this is a question for the whole panel. Do you envisage any significant and long-lasting changes to customer behaviours that will impact hotels or hospitality on a wider scale?
I do think there's going to be always an element now of health and hygiene and safety in that respect going forward. I don't think that's going to disappear from the industry for maybe never, but certainly for a long time. I think that's going to be it. I think people just want to feel confident when they're traveling and when they're staying with hotels. And there's definitely going to be there's so much pent up demand. People want to travel. And when they feel it's safe to do so, and they're allowed to do so, they will. I think people are going to really flood back in, but certain markets first over others. But that element of health and hygiene is something we're looking at quite closely. You know, last March or last April, we did launch what we call our Set Safe Day, which is a set of procedures and guidelines that we have for all hotels, just to ensure that we are going through all of those procedures that we should be, falling in line with government kind of guidelines and so on. But I think it's here to come for the future, and there are going to be new accreditation programs on that front. I think Forbes are doing something right now. We've had some discussions with them, for example. But I think that's a definite element that's going to stick going forward.
Definitely. And Robin or Ruud, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the desire to travel is still there, and it's very, very strong, perhaps in a weird kind of way, stronger than ever, because people haven't been able to do it. So I totally agree with Brian that possibly the way people travel will change, and maybe people are going to become even more last minute, or actually maybe people are going to become, like we are seeing a lot of demand at the moment for kind of Q3, Q4 this year, which we just wouldn't expect to receive at this time of year, but we all know why that is. So yeah, I think small bits will change about, travel behavior, consumer behavior, et cetera, but at the end of the day, the foundations of travel are still going to be very, very strong. Of course, you kind of speak forever on this subject, and leisure travel will bounce back first, of course, and possibly actually luxury travel may take a bit longer to come back. But we know that corporate is going to be a bit slower, of course, and there's a lot of questions about, has corporate or business travel changed forever with Zoom and Microsoft Teams and people realizing you can effectively do business that way. But again, I think particularly at a certain level, there is a desire for business to be done face to face, and whether you shake hands on a deal or not anymore, who knows? Well, in the years to come, but there is that desire. And probably the last segment to come back is going to be groups. I'm sure, but whether that's leisure groups or incentives or so on, which again is naturally understandable. But I don't think anything is going to change too dramatically once we get 2 to 3 years down the line, if I'm honest.
Yeah. And nothing like making people want to do something by telling them they can't do it, right? So if you can't do something, that's what they want to do.
I agree with that.
I think also what I actually heard, and I totally agree with the point on business travel. I do feel, and I read this article about, the kind of finance industry, consulting firms, etc. They all expect business travel to potentially permanently scale down by about 25 to 40% or so. So that is quite interesting. Whether that is going to be the case, of course, is to be seen. I think on the leisure side, and Robin briefly touched on it, due to the nature of our business mix, we do work very closely with luxury travel advisors as well, worldwide, but particularly I would say in the US markets. They all deal with fairly complex itinerary, multi-generational travel as well. And I think the travel advisors have really proven their worth, particularly during the pandemic, with restrictions per market changing, almost on a daily basis, and having to stay educated on that. And I do feel that, they, like I said, have proven their worth, if that was at all needed, within the luxury arena. And I think they're there to stay as well.
Fantastic. Okay. Okay, so next question for the panel. Do commercial teams have the right skills to operate in a recovery market? And if not, what training or development would be needed?
I actually, sorry, Robin, no, I actually really enjoyed that conversation because, and I love the fact that you specifically meant, the teams as opposed to individuals, because I do feel that what I experienced, at least, and I mentioned it earlier very briefly, is that, we got together for brainstorm sessions, multiple times a week across the 3 hotels, and those have been very, very productive. And I think where we really benefited from is to, kind of utilize each other's area of expertise and our strengths to really kind of come up with out of the box initiatives to, to adapt to the ever-changing market conditions and the differences in each market as well, and to actually exchange best practices from one market or from one hotel to the other. So that's been incredibly exciting, and I do feel that through that we've actually learned new skills as well.
Yeah. I think was Robin, were you going to sort of say something at the start of that?
Couldn't agree more, Ruud. Yeah, no, I think I'm not even so sure it's about skills, maybe, because naturally none of us are going to have the right skill set to deal with this current situation. It's more about the mindset and the adaptability and the flexibility. And people are going to learn new skills, even if they don't know it's happening. Like Ruud mentioned, I think as a commercial team, we've all got together so much more often, kind of across our various hotels, and also with groups within the commercial team that perhaps others wouldn't normally speak with. So there's been so much more cross exposure to different people's kind of skill sets and ways of thinking that I actually think it's been quite healthy in that sense. But people probably haven't necessarily realized that they've learned new skills throughout this, but it's kind of happened due to that.
Right. And Brian?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a huge amount to add. I agree with all of that, really. I think the teams have done incredibly well from our point of view, and they have learnt new skills by just that cross exposure. As you say, Rob, Ruud mentioned about forgetting your job description and just actually chipping in with everything that needs to get done. I think has been great, actually, and that's been kind of almost training development on the fly for a lot of people. And I think they did have the skills already. It's just a question of applying themselves. And absolutely, the mentality of opening yourself up to do that, being flexible. That's what it takes.
I had a very interesting conversation with a head of revenue. I obviously won't mention any names, but he gave me some fantastic examples. And I do think we forget that, the sole reason we employed the people we did in the first place is because they're great at what they do. And I think that we have to almost see that again, is that people will come into themselves and they will step up when the time is needed. And I think that's not seen any more than we do on property. You see that sort of family camaraderie, and that I think one of my titles over the video was camaraderie through adversity, and people really coming together. And I think it's almost seen more on property because you do see everybody. When it's a busy day, we call it all hands on deck. I used to work on property myself. All hands on deck. You basically go to the front desk. If you've got to move bags for guests, then you've got to move bags for guests. If you've got to be at the front door welcoming people in, that's what you got to do. And it's one of these things where I think now more than ever we're seeing a lot more of that, where people are coming together. They're thinking to themselves almost that they don't even have to be asked to do this, but they're thinking to themselves, let me go up to Robin or let me go up to Brian and say, look, what can I do? Is there something else I can do? Is there something more I can do? What do we need as a business, or what do we need as a team? I'm willing and I'm ready to step up. And I have seen that more and more and heard a lot more examples of this. And I think that's something for anybody on property right now. Actually, I celebrate everybody that's on property that's having to deal with everything they've had to deal with, because they are the customer facing, right? They're the people that are having to deal with the people saying, I don't like this or I don't like that. And it's something that's forgotten, I think, sometimes. Yeah,
and maybe to add to that, Tom, I do think that managers also have a responsibility towards their team to keep to look at the positive things, even in the dire situation that we have been in collectively. And I think, what we have been doing, and I've been very aware of that, is to actually celebrate small successes as well. And on the revenue side, for example, obviously there's nothing to celebrate about the occupancy levels that we've been performing at. But if we looked at our STR performance, for example, so our hotel performance versus that of our competitive set, then we've kind of consistently, in Amsterdam at least, at the Conservatorium, outperformed our competitive set with RGIs, that we have never seen before. And that is not something to be proud of or to be happy about, but I do think it's important to actually acknowledge it, because I do think that was a result of these brainstorming sessions and creative initiatives that we have come up with. And I think celebrating small successes and keep the team spirit up. We've also done that through weekly happy hours on a Friday afternoon at 4. I think that has been very important, and we as a team have stayed close together as a result of that.
Happy hour at 4 o'clock seems very early, Rid.
I know. We started at 5 o'clock, but I was like, no, let's just start at 4.
I think it's warranted. I think it's warranted.
It doesn't always include alcohol, by the way. That's something important to highlight.
Okay. All right. I suppose next question is specifically for Robin here. So, how has the role of the revenue manager or revenue management changed over the past 10 to 15 years? And how would you best describe the role today?
The change has been humongous. I would say, I've been in revenue management for about 15, 16 years. It's unrecognizable. So, 10 to 15 years ago, the role really was, and I think you can also look at it by how you would get into the role. 10 to 15 years ago, it was a very closely related role to perhaps the reservations function. And you would naturally, only really go into revenue management from a reservations position. It just seemed to be the way things worked. And that's probably because it was a much more administrative role or manual role, shall we say. So much of your time was wasted, dare I say, on updating various different extranets and opening and closing rates here and creating reports rather than looking at reports and data. Whereas today, of course, technology has been a huge help in furthering the role, because there are systems and there's AI now that will do all of the kind of manual work and putting the data together, setting your rates, yielding where necessary. All of that's done for you. Again, with the price comparison and so on. So the role today is much, much more commercially focused. And that goes back, right back to the beginning of this conversation where we spoke about how closely revenue and sales work and how closely marketing and revenue work. And it is just one commercial ecosystem now. There's the lines between revenue, sales, marketing, PR, digital are so blurred in a good way. Because, I think the revenue manager today doesn't need to just focus so much on pricing for the next 30 days. Am I going to close free sale there? Or, it's actually, your strategy is already set like 2 months ago for the next 30 days, and the systems can kind of take over to a degree and probably do 70% of your work. And you really need to be thinking 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, even 12 to 24 months down the line. At what the strategy is and what's happening in the market, and again, how you can be at the front of the queue, rather than if you're that person that is just, you can't get out of looking at the next kind of 30 days, it means probably you're at the back of the queue because all you're doing is chasing the competitors when they up or lower their pricing, or when they release a certain promotion, you're probably going to do something similar. You know what I mean? So I think in that respect, it's changed a lot, but at the same time, it's probably also become, I think if you asked every revenue manager to write down their job description, every single one would be completely different.
Yeah.
Because something has evolved so rapidly and like I say, beyond recognition over a relatively short period of time. Revenue is still one of the newer functions. Sales has been around forever. Marketing's been around forever. The problem is it's evolved in lots of different directions. And one hotel may still consider a revenue manager as someone that locks himself in a dark room and never speaks to anyone, and is just behind their computer.
Maybe we should adopt that, Robin.
Yeah, I'd wait for that. I'd like to lock myself in a dark room sometimes, actually. But anyway, whereas other ones, they are perhaps the kind of leader of the organization. Like, I mentioned I was with Jumeirah before, and the chief commercial officer of Jumeirah came from revenue. He was a VP of revenue, the director of revenue before. And that's also kind of for some organizations where it's going. So, it's been a really interesting kind of journey to follow.
Yeah, no, this is it. And actually, following on from that, because there's another question from one of the audience members. So what are the possibilities after revenue management? So I suppose we've talked about obviously the history of it and obviously where it is today and how it differs. But if you're in revenue management now, and I do think this is a very, very good question, is what are the possibilities after revenue management? What happens then? I've got a couple, but what are you thinking?
Well, I think the natural progression is world domination. But there's maybe some steps before then, which it's a very good question actually, and it's quite a difficult one to answer because, like I said before, no revenue manager or probably no revenue role is quite the same within organizations, and because the revenue manager of today has got such a dynamic role and almost like an involvement in almost every revenue generating function in the hotel these days. Mm-hmm. The sky's kind of the limit when it comes to the next role. And it very much, I would say, depends more on the individual person's character and kind of DNA as to where they go.
I probably want to get into marketing, I would imagine.
Yeah, if you want to take a step back in your career, you could go to marketing for sure. There's nothing wrong with that. But no, I mean, quite seriously, like, it could be marketing. It really depends. Like, we've got some absolutely fantastic, in the past, we've had some absolutely fantastic revenue managers who actually their passion has been to learn more about digital marketing, and that's the direction they've chosen to go. And likewise, I mean, depending on the organization, it could be heading up a commercial structure. That's not something people would laugh at these days. It kind of makes a lot of sense. So I really wouldn't limit someone to saying, like in the past, if you're in reservations, you're going to revenue next. It's not like that anymore.
Yeah.
It's an open market.
And I suppose, as you say, the blurred lines there now, the options are there. But I also think that it's down to, again, the leadership and the management, is that if you see somebody with potential, or if you see somebody that clearly wants to progress, it's about spending. And obviously we know that time is money and so on, and especially in a market like this. But if we're going to cultivate that talent, I suppose, to be the future commercial leaders, and Robin, you know me by now, I badger on about this all the time, but if we're not doing it, the market will become stagnant. There will not be a conveyor belt, if you like, of fantastic talent coming through if it's not for the current leaders saying, right, what do you want to achieve and how can I make that happen, or how can I help you make that happen? Ruud, I know I cut you off there, sorry.
No, don't worry. No, so I fully agree with what Robin just said, and maybe just a nice example to share about what's after that for revenue. I do fully agree that these roles can actually move into something that's much broader than that. And one example to share: I spent 9 years of my career and the start of my career actually in London and with Hilton Hotels actually. And I was overseeing sales for the Hilton at Heathrow Airport. And during that time, this was probably 2007, I think it was, we had a cluster revenue director for the London Airport hotels, a lady called Patricia Page Champion. And she is still with Hilton. She's now a senior vice president and global commercial director for Hilton, overseeing revenue and sales as well. And I think that's a prime example, is that, I would say the sky's the limit, really. It just comes down to your work ethic, your willingness to adapt within your current role and within future roles as well, take an open-minded approach and, be willing to actually, work hard and put in the hours and deliver.
Definitely. And I think it's one of these things where I've seen examples of managing directors, CEOs, this sort of thing coming from these revenue management roles. Whereas before, we've generally, whether you sort of agree with this or not, but we've generally always seen it coming from finance. Finance have always been sort of that sort of head, but we've started to see it a lot more. The other thing I've seen quite a lot is people wanting to go down the asset management route coming out of revenue management, because there's a lot of crossovers there. But I do think that wider commercial director route is certainly something that I'm seeing more and more revenue management personnel going into for obvious reasons, I think, in a lot of ways. Brian, the next question is actually for you, sir. Now, what are the steps to crafting a career in hospitality marketing? So what are the steps? What are your secrets?
I think largely it's about, we've spoken about it a number of times, I think it's about variety, and it's about learning everything that you can with all those functions coming together. Robin and Rod particularly love this when I say that marketing is a bit like the glue that holds it all together. You know, I think it's about marketing becoming everybody's friend. You know, to get marketing kind of done, you need to be close to everybody. You need to be close to revenue because you want to get your pricing sorted out and you want to get your availability there. You want to be close to sales because they're going to help you promote that. You want to be close to the operation because they've got to deliver what you're marketing, you know, at the end of the day. So I kind of think, you know, I spent a lot of time early on in my career just kind of cross exposure. I think something else we've mentioned quite a bit during this conversation, learning how all the functions work, because, you know, you need to understand that in order to effectively market anything. And you need everyone's buy-in, you know, from all of those departments and so on. So everyone is your friend. I think it's also important to understand about demand generation, because that's ultimately what marketing is. You know, when I started in marketing because I loved being creative. I loved the creative side of things, whether that was creating something visually or storytelling or whatever it is. I enjoyed that part of things. And that's important, you know, from a branding point of view. You want something that resonates with people. You want something that looks beautiful, that works. But what's the point in designing a beautiful website if no one sees it, for example? So there's an element of demand generation and actually bringing people to you. And that's, you know, I think leading on to the fact that really digital is king nowadays. And, you know, all those traditional marketing processes and things that we used to do, you need to understand and you need to be able to do those. But it's, I think, increasingly important as we go forward now to focus on the digital world. And, you know, I've been in marketing hospitality for over 20 years, and it was a small part of the role when I started. Now it's the biggest part of the role, is understanding how the digital ecosystem works and how you can get your hotel, your restaurant, your property in front of the right people.
Yeah. Is there anything anybody would like to add to that?
Not particularly.
I was going to say, I think he nailed it for obvious reasons. No, that's I think for anybody coming from obviously the universities that I work with, I think they'll find that hugely valuable, because again, everybody is looking at how to get back into this industry, because a lot of students right now, a lot of graduates and new graduates are, and for the want of a better phrase, in some cases they are terrified. They don't know if they're even going to, you know, after studying for so long, they don't even know if they're going to be able to get into the industry because there's so much competition out there. And they're already having to compete with 200-300 other candidates. So I suppose in terms of that element, okay, and this is a question again from one of our students that are obviously that I've lectured in the past, but what does a graduate need to do to stand out to a potential employer? This person actually goes on to say, I keep getting told I don't have as much experience, but how do I start a career with no experience?
I think from my point of view, actually, I think people that just look at experience, particularly when you're a graduate or when you're starting your career, is the incorrect thing to do. I think we work in a people business, and actually I'm more interested in people's attitude to and the willingness to work. And, you know, you can often kind of pick up on somebody's attitude and their personality very quickly, you know, from meeting them. And I often look at more of that than I look at, you know, what the experience is. Of course, it's nice to have experience for sure, and you need to gain experience as quickly as you can. But I don't think it should be the one thing that we look at as the first thing, you know, to think about.
Yeah, I would actually, I would say, you know, I was saying earlier about how revenue is not that one defined role anymore. For me, I've got very little interest actually in whether someone has 5 years of director of revenue level experience, because I don't know what that means. Like, what kind of a revenue role was it that you were carrying out? Sometimes you can actually bring bad habits into our organization. So For me, I completely agree. It's about the DNA of that person and what's their mindset, what's their ambitions, and how will they fit into the organization. We can teach them, our ethos and the way we work with our systems and revenue management. That's easy. Yeah, it's more how they fit as a person into the organization.
Yeah. I think also maybe if people are looking for experience, and I'm sure companies do that. We've had some great examples of students coming to us for internships and doing that early on, in their career, as early as they can almost. And even some people that said, "Look, I'm happy to come and work with you, even if you can afford to do it unpaid sometimes, come into a department, come into an organization and learn as much as you can to get that on your CV." I know it's not always easy to do, and it's easier to say than to do it, but I think that's a good way to do it, because you also build your connections, and that's ultimately what you need to do.
I'd agree.
I
agree. Oh yeah, go on.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I think maybe from my perspective, I would say that's the advice that I give, particularly to, I would say, the kind of graduates nowadays. I do feel, be a little bit patient. Don't desire to be at director level within 2 years, and be, willing and eager to actually learn the business, recognize perhaps where your areas of interest are, where your strengths are as well. Don't feel that you need to be good at everything, because nobody can be an expert in every single field, right? So I think it almost you almost need to need a couple of years of experience to really kind of recognize that. And I think, take a long-term approach as well as versus a short-term approach. I think that's always, and don't always compare yourself to perhaps other peers where they are versus you, because everybody takes a different journey, right? So that's kind of advice that I just want to share.
Definitely. One more tip that I've just come to my mind, actually, that I always has impressed me in the past with graduates and students.
Go on.
Is do your research properly, and before you come in and speak to a company, learn about their competitive landscape, learn about their competitors, learn about their business. It's so often, I will talk to sort of graduates or people early in their career, and they come in and I'll ask them, so what do you think about the hotel? If and they're like, oh, well, I've not really. No, I've not looked into it. I've never been here before. I don't know much about it. I said, well, what about our competitors? Who do you think we compete with in London, Amsterdam, Paris? And then, there's no thought there. So I think that's something that's immediately will say to me, the willingness to learn, the openness, things like that is, do your research. That's an important thing to do.
I can tell you now, if there's any students of mine that are going to be tuning into this, and again, Robin will know this, some of the big advice I give them is never walk into a room without doing your research. Don't ever walk into that room without understanding who this business is and so on. And I'd like to think that everybody that I've sort of had any contact with from that graduate element has obviously understood that. I think in terms of the graduates themselves, Ruud, I actually really agree with you, is don't try and be something you're not, but don't try and get somewhere as quickly as possible. Because as we all know in this industry, you've had to go through, as you say, your own journey. You've had to go through your own ups and downs, and you've had to hit brick walls at times.
And other industries as well, I think.
This is it. Yeah, this is it. And I think you almost become the professional you are by going through that journey. It's not about it's a very cliche thing, but it's not about the destination. It's about what you've gone through to become that. I massively agree with that. I massively agree with it. I suppose, actually, Ruud, this question, would you be able to share 3 key insights that you've obviously realized over the time that you've obviously been in the industry, and how to get where you are today?
Yes, of course. So I feel one of them, I'm not sure if Robin and Brian agree, but I think staying humble, I think, is one of them. I do feel that, we've all worked with quite a few people in our past, right? But I do generally feel that those that do stay humble and don't really have an ego or try to always be the number one, sometimes at the expense of their peers. I do think that actually does bring you far. I do feel that sometimes, colleagues with a bit of an ego, I think it generally stems from insecurity. And I think we all generally can see that sometimes. I think I do feel that that sometimes limits your ability to further develop a little bit. So I think just, take an open-minded approach. Like I said, recognize your own strengths, empower your colleagues and their areas of expertise, respect them. I think that is something that will actually, bring you far early on in your career as you start out, but also, of course, and to be given the opportunities and the likability factor and, being supported and mentored. But also, I think later on as a leader, to actually empower your team members and, wanting them to sometimes even outshine you in their particular area of expertise and not feel threatened about that or, and really celebrate it, because I do feel that actually then reflects well on you as a leader as well, because they're part of the team. So being humble, I would say, is one of them. The other one I would say is being proactive. And maybe that's also partly because I started off within my career within proactive sales. So it's important to be proactive. And I think maybe just a funny story to share with you, being Dutch, growing up and being at high school, my English was the worst. I'm from a really small village in the northern part of Holland. And when I was graduating, I had the lowest grade at high school in English of all 150 students. Ironically, my first job in England was actually in England, was in London. That's where I started off my career. And how I got there is because I very much recognized that, in order to actually kind of kickstart my career, it's important to improve my English. And I wrote a script in my second year of hotel management, it was a call script. And I basically knew that I had 3 months of vacation coming up. So I thought I actually want to go to an English speaking country. And I made a list of about 50 hotels. And I basically called 50 hotels on a Friday afternoon at my parents' home. And, basically offered to actually work there for free during the summer of 2003, I think it was. And the one hotel that actually accepted me and the one that was positive towards this was, and I did call them all 50, was the Hilton at Heathrow Airport. And, the HR director actually offered me to pay for my flights and accommodation for me to actually work for them for free in F&B. And that was an incredibly personal experience as well, to live in a home with, 25 other, students and trainees, and also professionally, because my condition, or what I actually asked for in return, was a written reference after those 3 months that I've actually worked for the Hilton Heathrow Airport in that position. And I actually used that to then secure my sales and marketing placement at the Hilton London Metropole the year after. And that basically kickstarted my career in sales as a sales researcher for Hilton. And I stayed with the company for 4 years. So I would say be proactive and think outside the box. Be disciplined is definitely an insight I want to share. And then the last one, that I think is important is be prepared to put in the hours as well. It doesn't always come easily. We are not here because we've got a 9-to-5 mentality, but we were also willing to actually work evenings. And especially in sales, your network is key. So in order to build up your network, of course, there's sometimes client entertainment involved, right? So you need to go for dinners and evening functions. And sometimes you're like, okay, I need to work another evening. Why am I doing this? But I think it's really for your own benefit and for your own network. So I think be prepared to put in the hours, I think is also important. And that will actually differentiate you from some other peers in the industry.
Fantastic. Some fantastic advice there. So for anybody that's watching this and got to this point, I think write those down or pause, rewind, watch it and so on, because fantastic. I suppose for Robin and Brian, is there anything that you've, realized over the years that Ruud hasn't touched on at all?
I've realized Ruud still needs to work on his English.
I'm still working. Actually, I must say, since I moved back to Holland, I feel my accent got stronger again. So that's definitely something. But I have to say, I always thought an accent is a negative. Yeah. But then I realized when I was a sales researcher in my first job that they remembered my voice and not that one of my English colleague. And especially my name Ruud. When you call someone, it's a cold call, and you say, I'm Ruud, that generally kind of, gets remembered as well.
That's very true, actually. I hadn't thought of that. No, good point. Well, any other points, Robin or Brian? Not about Ruud's English.
Yeah.
No, I think it was very well put, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with everything he said. Yeah, I mean, flexibility, put the hours in, I think is key. It is key.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so another one for Robin. How do you think people should start their experience and get exposure to RM, and how do they start? Oh, okay, fine. So this question again is from a student I've just looked, and they're basically asking, how does somebody gain experience if they're not already in the industry? And then how do they then start in a business? Now, obviously, again, from a recruitment element, I don't know if you agree with this, but I would actually go down the route of, I think we sort of mentioned this a moment ago, but try and find those internships, try and find those open days. I know obviously we've spoken about having students actually being on property and sort of spending a day understanding how things work. But I also think it actually starts with building your connections. I mean, that's what I always obviously say to my students. I mean, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think 100%. I think it's obviously, like I said before, it's a positive that there is no defined route into revenue management these days. But it can also make it probably it can muddy the water a bit. It's a bit confusing. Where in that case, how do I get into it? So obviously, there's courses out there, as your students will know very well. But I really think probably the advice Ruud just gave is the absolute perfect advice, which is it's you that you're selling. I mean, I know it's easy for me to say that, and there will, of course, be companies out there still that will just look at experience on a CV, but there's also many companies, and it's the trend that these companies are the ones growing that aren't looking at that. They're looking at application and personality and perseverance and all of those kind of things. So just try and get yourself in front of those hotels, and if you can get a 3-month internship or whatever it might be, and we've had a few in the past, but if someone came to us and we were able to offer them that opening, and they showed the application and the DNA and everything we're looking for, I wouldn't think twice about the fact they actually haven't done it before. I'm not saying we'd throw a director of revenue position at them, but you know what I mean? Like, to give them that stepping stone to actually get their first role, I wouldn't think twice about it.
No.
So no, I really think it is about how they apply themselves, and how proactive they want to be. You've got to really put the effort in. Don't get kind of downhearted if after the first 5 times you've tried, everyone is turning around saying no, you don't have enough experience. Because for every, maybe every 9 that you try, there's one there that's going to think a little bit more outside the box, and who knows, you may have a Ruud on your hands 10 years down the line.
Let's hope so. Okay, so what are the panel's thoughts on continued professional development, and what do they do in terms of professional development for their teams? So I suppose this is something that has actually been spoken about a lot more recently, and of course it's because the roles are slightly changing because of obviously the market, and those lines are blurring and so on and so forth. So I suppose, what are all of your views on continued professional development? How do you think it's done? But I suppose more specifically from this question, how do you guys do it?
For me, it's absolutely vital that we really encourage and we allow, our talented people to bloom and to progress, and to encourage all of that. I think it's one of the biggest challenges that the industry faces is how do we keep hold of people, and how do we retain our staff, because it's quite a transient business ultimately. But it's something that we focus on a lot. And actually, we've taken this downtime over the pandemic to really develop a program that we're calling the SET Management Academy. And it's actually designed to really help identify our leaders of the future almost. People that are keen to pursue a career in hospitality. It's a kind of a modular-based system, but it's something that gives that cross-exposure across all the businesses. And really to develop your skills as a leader, and as a manager, and how do you look after teams? How do you motivate people? But also, what skills do you need yourself? So I think as a company is something that we feel is really vital to our success. We have some great people. We want to develop them. We want to keep them. And as we've kind of talked about, we don't just employ people on their experience. It's about their mentality and their work ethic, and if their willingness to learn. And if we get those people in at the right time and we encourage them, and even if they do move on to another company, that's okay in a way, because actually it's the legacy that we've given them and the fact that they'll talk about us and have a positive experience with us. That's what we really want to happen.
Definitely. Guys, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think. No, go on.
Yeah, no, I think I also think managers need to take, when you talk about professional development, it's also professional development on the job. It's not always about external trainings, and of course the management academy that we're working on is a great example. But I do also think managers need to take their responsibility for committing to bi-weekly or regular one-to-one reviews with their team members, so they can actually keep track of development and review particular areas for development, as well as end-of-year reviews where you really outline, what your professional development areas are going to be for the coming year, and make sure that you support your team members to actually follow through on those, so that you don't have the exact same conversation a year later. And I do think that team members have every right to actually have a end-of-year review and regular check-ins, so that there's nothing that comes as a surprise if there's something constructive to be shared.
Yes. Yeah, no, I get that. And Robin?
Yeah, I think I think that covers that. I mean, Brian said about companies providing those learning opportunities. Ruud said about learning on the job. I mean, probably the only other thing I'd add is learn yourself as well. Like self-learning. Read absolutely everything. Listen to absolutely everything. Subscribe to all newsletter, industry newsletters out there. Read every interview with, chain CEO.
Watch E&Ftv.
Watch E&Ftv, exactly. Read about other sectors. Like, you can be pretty confident that reading about what Google is currently working on is going to be highly relevant to you in 5 years' time, for example. So learn about that kind of stuff now. And, I would highly recommend that element to it, as well as obviously, what the company can do for you and what you can do during those hours you're at work.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, it's looking at the sort of continued professional development, as you say, your own, but at home. Obviously, right now, there's so many people that are out of work right now or looking on the job market. And a lot of industry leaders are saying, well, what have you been doing during this period of time? And it doesn't always need to be, these expensive courses, Econel and all this sort of stuff, your robust, in detail qualification type stuff. It can just be understanding how other ways or other functions work. If you're already working revenue management and you want to widen your experience or exposure, look to see how marketing works. Look to see how sales works. It doesn't always have to come down to you investing in that. It would be great if you've got the option to do that. But there's also fantastic forums like this one, like others, where they're discussing current topics. They're discussing their industries. They're discussing the way their functions work. And I'm not saying that that's going to be the be all and end all of your professional development. But if you're doing that on a daily basis, you're cultivating your mind to start accepting other ways of working and understanding how those other functions work. Yeah. And I do think it starts with at home, yourself putting that time in.
No, I agree, actually. Maybe just to add to that, I think taking responsibility and self-awareness, I think, are incredibly important. I think one of the areas I've really been working on a little bit, we're all working from home and generally speaking on our own. And sometimes, we don't get energized by our colleagues because obviously, we spend the majority of our time on our own. So what I've been doing, actually, there's this podcast, like an entrepreneurial podcast. I think it's called 0 to 7 Figures. And they have, about hundreds of short 6-minute podcasts on a variety of topics that are actually relevant to entrepreneurs. And not that I call myself an entrepreneur, but I do actually really quite enjoy the mindset of entrepreneurs. And one of them is, how to optimize productivity during the day, how to get out of a rut, the 10 10 tips to jumpstart your day. And this, I think, that really motivate me. And I just listen to them during my breakfast, and it really kind of jumpstarts my day, basically. That's actually what it literally does. And sometimes I listen to the same, two or three times, because it really, you hear different things. And I think taking responsibility for your own developments and productivity is, I think, very important.
Fantastic.
Yeah, agreed.
Anything else to add? No? Well, I want to finish this panel discussion on a really sort of positive note. Let's go around and basically give a piece of advice, because as I say, as you guys know, I come at it from an employability point of view. There's a lot of my viewers that are, trying to find a job right now in a very difficult time. And that's obviously what this ambassador project is all about, is it's injecting that information, but also that encouragement as well from leaders in our industry. So I suppose, what advice would you give to somebody, one piece of advice that you give to somebody that's on the market right now? Let's start with Brian.
Thank you. I was going to say, I think for me, resilience and test and learn, keep going. Don't kind of get put off or feel down about getting rejection sometimes. I think that's what happens. But test and learn, change things a little bit, tweak your CV, tweak your approach, think about how you could have done things a little bit better perhaps, and just keep testing and learning and progress that way. And don't give up. I think the future is incredibly bright for the travel industry, even though we've gone through this, devastating kind of 12 months, and it's been incredibly difficult for everybody, and not just hospitality, of course. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we feel as a company that there's huge opportunity in the road ahead. It will bounce back. People's desire to travel has not disappeared. It's human nature. We want to discover, we want to explore, we don't want to sit still, we want to grow personally and emotionally and everything else. So travel is a great enabler of that, and it's here to stay. It's not going to go away. We will adapt for sure, but there's a big future for travel.
Fantastic. Robin?
I would say maybe find your edge. There's going to be, the reality is there is going to be a lot of competition out there for roles at the moment, and probably a lot of people going through the same run of the mill kind of interview answers and so on. So what's your cutting edge? And that's, going to be different for everyone. But as Brian said earlier, do your research, do things that are going to make you stand out from probably, the tens or maybe even hundreds of other interviews that are being carried out, something that's going to make them remember you and that, time that they spent with you, whether it's your own personal character, whether it's something really remarkable you've noticed about what that company does or their product. Just find your edge.
Yeah. And Ruud?
I would say stay true to yourself and be yourself. Don't try to be someone else. Don't compare yourself to others. Talked about it briefly earlier. I think that's incredibly important. And, be patient as well. That are probably the things that I want to share.
Fantastic. And my one, people have heard me say this before, but it's something that I believe wholeheartedly in, is do not rely on that apply now button. Do not just click that apply now button and hope that your CV will go to the front of the pile of the hiring manager. Make sure that you are applying, but make sure you email, make sure you link in, make sure you call every single time that you can. Make sure that your human element is coming across and not just that white piece of paper with a black background. Because as I said before, that apply now button will not be the be all and end all of your search. Do not quantify the success of your search during that day on how many times you've clicked the apply now button. That's what I'd say. Get back into the driver's seat of your job search. That's what I'd say. Guys, I just want to say a massive, massive thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules, because I know how busy you all are. So thank you so much for taking the time. I really do appreciate it. And thank you for taking part. So thank you all.
You're welcome. Yeah,
thanks.
Great pleasure. Thanks.
Keep well.
And hopefully this won't be the last time we can catch up. Maybe in a few months' time we can catch up, see how things are going, maybe towards the end of the year or something. But yeah, thank you guys all again. And everybody,
developments actually coming up with the company as well, which we go public with in a couple of weeks' time. So watch this space, I would say.
Fantastic. Well, maybe we can get one of you back on to talk about it. That would be amazing. Let's look at maybe doing that once it's launched. There you go, a sneak peek. Say again?
I said we nominate Robin to do that.
Right, okay, fine. Okay, guys, well, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. We really do appreciate it. We hope that you found some value in it. And do not forget to see who's on next week's episode now.